Whether you are watching on our YouTube channel at Oddshark Betting or on one of our podcast platforms, welcome to episode 4 of The Huddle. Before we get started, I'm excited to talk about MLB Playoffs today. I'm going to talk a little survivor pool strategy and, of course, a little reaction from the Thursday night football game and a few other things as well. But first, I want to acknowledge the show is going to look a little different today. My wonderful co-host, Andrew Avery, is not with us today because he had a death in the family. So I wanted to acknowledge that, and from all of us at Oddshark, our thoughts are with you, Andrew. We do have a substitute today. And you know, when there's a substitute teacher in the classroom, things can get a little wild and crazy. So I'm excited to introduce to you the prop king, baseball aficionado, NFL guru, fantasy football guru, Mitch Bannon. Welcome to your first episode of The Huddle, my friend. How are you doing after an action-packed an action-packed night of 2 baseball games, playoffs, and then you got the Thursday night game as well? Did you get any sleep, or is your head still racing after all that?
Yeah, I made it through. I think the Astros helped me out. First of all, thanks for having me. This should be fun. But the Astros definitely helped me out last night. Scored a bunch of runs in the first couple innings, so I could really focus on kind of the early baseball game and then into the football game. Had that Texas Astros game been close, might have been a difficult multi-viewing experience, but we made it through.
I love it, man. So let's jump right into the Thursday night football game. A lot of good props hit last night, including the folks that trusted Travis Etienne going up against a really tough Saints rush defense. He hit that first touchdown scorer prop. He also hit the 2 touchdown scorer prop. We saw Calvin Ridley go way under on his receiving yard totals, and we saw Kamara go over rushing and receiving yards. Did you have any involvement in these props, and what are your thoughts in general on the Thursday night game?
Unfortunately, I was involved. Unfortunately, I was not on any of those winners. I was all over the Kamara under. I thought, especially if Lawrence wasn't going to play, maybe there'd be a lot of rushing in this game. It would be a slower one, take away from Kamara. He was much more involved in the offense in general than I thought he'd be. It felt like Carr kept hitting him underneath the zone for all the dump-off yardage, and then he still got over 50 rushing yards. So that was a tough beat. The game was better than I thought it was going to be. I thought we were looking for an ugly affair. Trevor Lawrence, he wasn't injured at all. I don't know what that entire debacle was about. He was dominant with his legs, probably won them the game with his legs. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on what that entire injury song and dance was yesterday or how the game played out, but that was kind of weird to me.
Yeah, it was wild, man. The line was going crazy. The total was going crazy, moving all around the place before the game. We knew that Lawrence was going to be starting, and even though we knew Lawrence was going to be starting, and the beat writers were not only saying was he going to be starting, but that he looked great in the warm-ups, that he was moving around, he was mobile, he was high-fiving his coaches, he was ready to go. Money kept pouring in on the Saints despite that news, and like you said, Lawrence looked well. He showed early on in the game that he could still use those wheels, so that was impressive. I wanted to ask you about Derek Carr. I want to ask you if you think Derek Carr should still be starting for the Saints, because like you said, there was a lot of checkdowns last night. The guy always seems to be limping around. Derek Carr never looks fully healthy. He's not taking deep shots down the field like he used to. On Oddshark, we posted to Twitter the question, should Derek Carr be benched? And I want to read you some of the responses from some of our followers out there. Mad Journalist said, Winston is better. That's sad to say, but true. Fluffhead13 said, as much as I despise Carr, they got to stick with it and work through it. And then Farnsworth Dill said, start Taysom. That's obviously Taysom Hill's burner account, that last one right there. But what are your thoughts on what the Saints should do with Derek Carr after he's not looking so hot?
I think I'm kind of a Derek Carr truther. I didn't think he looked that bad yesterday. I feel like obviously there was a lot of checkdowns, a lot of easy throws, but that's who Derek Carr is. I feel like for me personally, Derek Carr is the measuring stick of, are you a good quarterback or are you just an NFL quarterback? If you're better than Carr, you're a good quarterback. If you're worse than him, you're kind of just a guy. And I think Carr is, he is what he is. The weird part is, last night I didn't think he looked that bad. 300 yards, 1 touchdown. Foster Moreau catches that one at the end in the end zone. That looks like a pretty good day for Carr. He probably, since they came to overtime, maybe they win it. It's kind of a good Derek Carr story. But I think the hard part is, Jameis Winston's almost the opposite. You have to buy into a quarterback philosophy. Are you going with the guy who can make the easy throws, the medium throws, just kind of kill clock and not ruin your day? Are you going to go all upside, all downside with Jameis Winston? And clearly the Saints are betting on Carr, and I think it would be a pretty radical philosophy shift if they're going to change to Winston at this point in the season.
Are you concerned at all with the tension that seems to be brewing between Carr and his receivers, getting a little hot headed with Olave? I don't want to speak for those players because, of course, I'm not in the locker room. But like you said, Winston is the opposite of Carr. So I could see a receiver wanting Winston in the lineup so that he can be chucking up those 70-yard passes. Hey, if one gets intercepted every once in a while, no big deal. I'm still getting my stats, you know? Are you concerned at all about that? And could this maybe like devolve into like a bad locker room situation potentially?
It could for sure. I think you have to, as a receiver, remember like who has Derek Carr played with before. Like he's a guy who has made or continued Devontae Adams' career success. He's had some really good receivers when he was with the Raiders. So it's not like it's not like a Zach Wilson where if you're like a receiver playing for this quarterback, you're like, oh, this guy's going to ruin my career. Like that's basically what Elijah Moore said last year is I want out because I'm not going to get any yards and my career is going to be over if I keep playing with this guy. Like it's been proven that Derek Carr can get you your stats. And obviously Olave's not happy because he's not getting a bunch of targets. He's not getting much in the end zone at all. But you have to understand that the quarterback's not the problem because he's kind of given receivers those stats before. So hopefully they have the wherewithal to think about that.
Last night, the over cashed. Finally, the Saints' first over of the season finally cashes last night. We've seen so many unders. Last week was an under fest in the NFL. Scoring's down, man. There were 9 games where there were 20 points or less scored by both teams. So scoring's way down in the NFL. Do you have any theories on what's going on here? Because this is not the NFL that I remember from the last couple of years.
I feel like we've been talking about how like all of the new rule changes were unlocking offenses dominating the NFL, and then we come into this year and it's like under central, low scoring central. Teams are getting like 18 points a game. It's the complete opposite. And like, so I went back to the offseason, looked at the rule changes, what happened. Nothing really stuck out for me there. The one thing I noticed, and we were talking about this earlier this week, the average age of quarterbacks in the league has plummeted this year, even compared to last year. This isn't like a long-time trend trending towards a lower age. Teams in the last year for this season have committed to young quarterbacks. I think people are, obviously there was a bunch of guys in the draft last year, but then also the second year guys are getting looks. And when you have those young, unestablished quarterbacks and teams are basically, we want to see if this guy is good. We want to see if Zach Wilson can actually be a guy. We want to see if, obviously, like Malik Willis can be a guy. They're giving him reps. Those are guys who are question marks. And they're young, and some of those guys are going to flop. And so that's going to hurt a lot of teams' offense. And I think that's kind of the only theory I have. Doesn't explain the league-wide decline in scoring, but that's maybe one contributing factor. What about you?
Well, it's a good point. There's been a lot of bad quarterback play from young quarterbacks and from some veteran quarterbacks this year. I think defenses are playing a different game this year. We're starting to see, an extra defensive back on the field instead of, one less linebacker. And so I think that a lot of these defenses, we saw it. It was like the way to stop Patrick Mahomes. Nobody could stop him, so you throw an extra defensive back on the field. You play a little softer and say, you're not going to beat me over the top. You're going to have to be patient and beat me underneath. And I think that those types of adjustments are maybe playing a role. I got to say, like, a lot of the coaching decisions this year, like going forward on fourth and 1, shotgun, and just like, going for it in the red zone and repeatedly missing in games, that's not the main factor, but that's also not helping as well. Interesting that all of the unders for next week's games have dropped except for one. There's one game, the Steelers-Rams game, the total has gone up from the opening line to where it sits today. They're all going under. And so we've got a little bit of a weather reason for that. There's going to be some bad weather, in the Giants game and the Patriots game and a few others. But what I think is also, and of course the quarterback thing too. You got the Bears and the Raiders playing. We got backup quarterbacks in both of those games. And so that under has gone down almost 10 points. It's dropped since the opener. But even that aside, I think that the sharp bettors out there, the folks that bet into these markets early in the week, I think they're saying these totals are still a little too high. And those guys are betting that this underfest is going to continue. We know at some point it's going to snap back and those overs are going to start hitting. Where are you on that? Do you think that's going to happen sooner or later?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Did this exact same thing not happen last year? I remember a couple weeks into the season, everyone was talking about the unders last year. And then you look at the season ending results, and it's pretty close to 50-50, like it always is. I don't know what week that snapback happened, but we should probably go back and look at that, because that's kind of the history or the dictating thing we could look for this week, and about what week those numbers snap back. I don't think it's going to happen this week, just because you mentioned all those pretty trash quarterbacks are going to be out there this week. But maybe when guys start to get healthy, those backups and third stringers start coming out of the lineup, we can start to see the numbers rise again.
Yeah, I'm with you on there. Let's transition to Major League Baseball. 2 fun playoff games last night. One game was a little more exciting than the other. We saw the Diamondbacks win on a walk-off, so they've now crawled their way back into this series with the Phillies. And then we saw the Astros even the series, crushing the Rangers 10-3. Are you more of a high-scoring playoff baseball game? Is that more exciting for you, or do you like the 1-0 game in the bottom of the 8th, kind of more what we saw in the National League game? Which game was more fun for you?
Oh, I'm an absolute sicko. Give me the 1-0 game. Give me runs scoring on pass balls. Give me that deciding the game all day. I think that game was one of the more entertaining games I've watched all playoffs so far, just because it's not like the Justin Verlander versus Nathan Eovaldi duel. It's the Brandon Pfaadt versus Ranger Suarez, the pitchers duel no one really saw coming. And also, this was, obviously they're only down 2-0, but that was basically a must-win game for the Diamondbacks. You go down 3-0, your season's over, and now they got Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen lined up for some of these next games. They're kind of in this series. I thought that one was super exciting. I kind of, as I mentioned earlier, bailed pretty early on the Astros game just because the Thursday night football game was on, so I'm glad I at least got one good baseball game to watch last night.
Hey, there's some fans in Boston saying, hey, the series is not over at 3-0, Mitch. Remember 2004,
True.
But you're absolutely it's pretty insurmountable when you get down to that point. How about that hit by Ketel Marte? That was a nasty pitch from Kimbrel that looked like it was going up in the zone, and he smashed it. I mean, that was an impressive at-bat from him.
Especially, first of all, he's had great at-bats all playoffs. He's kind of been their dude. But the at-bat before against Jose Alvarado was probably his worst at-bat of the playoffs. I don't know if Alvarado threw a single strike. It was all like cutters and sliders 6, 7, 8 inches below the zone. And it looked like Marte was just kind of swinging to swing. And so when he comes up with the game on the line in the 9th, I'm like, okay, Kimbrel's not going to give him a pitch to hit. He's been throwing those sliders below the zone all inning. And then Marte's all over that riser. And it was a pretty impressive at-bat. If he didn't get that hit, I think Kimbrel probably gets out of that inning just because of who's following him. So he saved the Diamondback season, I think, with that at-bat.
Saved it for now. We'll see what it looks like going forward. It's going to be fun. I want to hit you with some MVP odds. Last week's show, I told Andrew I really like Trey Turner in the MVP market. Bryce Harper, plus 700. Yordan Alvarez, plus 900. Altuve, plus 1,800. Alex Bregman, plus 2,200. Of course, when you're looking at these MVP odds, you have to weigh the player and their chances of getting hot if they make it to the World Series, because of course the ALCS and the NLCS is not decided yet. So anybody in those markets that kind of has your eye right now, or are you kind of waiting this out until we actually get to the World Series?
I love early World Series MVP markets. It's kind of like the one thing I'll always look at. Even in the DS, I'm kind of like, oh, there's some good value here. I got in on Yordan Alvarez, I think at about double that line at the end of the DS, and so I'm feeling pretty good about that. He's a guy who just performs in the playoffs, and especially if they match up against the Phillies, the Astros, that is, that's a lot of right-handing pitching he's going to see. He's going to be the guy who's going to have to do some damage against the Phillies, and he just hits nothing but home runs in October. Another guy I like, and I spent like an hour yesterday going through a bunch of books trying to find this guy on World Series MVP futures, is Jose Leclerc. Right now he's the Rangers closer, and he's been pretty lights out in this playoffs. He's got like a 1 ERA. He's pitched in almost every single game, but nobody will give me action on him. He's not even like a plus 20,000 guy at the bottom of the odds board. There's like 16 guys on the Diamondbacks listed, and no Jose Leclerc market for me. So if the Rangers win a couple more games, if people are willing to put Leclerc up there, get in on a high number, because I think he's a guy who could pitch in every single World Series game. And I think the storyline around the Rangers bullpen has been so big this year. They were kind of trash for 2 months. They almost cost them a playoff spot. but then he became the closer. He took it from Aroldis Chapman, and he has been lights out since. So I like that story too.
I like that long shot opportunity right there, Mitch. Nice one. Moving on here let's go back to the NFL. Let's do a little power rankings. I want to hit you with my top 5 power ranking teams. I know there's going to be one in there that you're like, what the heck, Tony? What are you doing? But
Okay.
let's start with number 5. I want to get your reaction. Eagles, I've got at number 5. This is a team that everybody knows they've got a loaded roster, but they just haven't had that truly dominating game that we know that they're capable of. We haven't seen the 4 or 5 touchdown game from Jalen Hurts yet. We haven't seen that defense really overwhelm someone. So that's why I'm not moving them up the board. And obviously, that was a terrible showing against the Jets last week. So I've got them at number 5. You got any issues with that?
No, that's about. I think 4-5 is pretty fair for the Eagles.
All right, next, it's kind of a similar argument for the Chiefs. Like, everybody, I think, suspects the Chiefs are going to be in the AFC Championship game. Like, nobody would be shocked if the Chiefs were in the Super Bowl. But again, there are some question marks at wide receiver, although they just traded for McCole Hardman. And they haven't had that dominant performance yet. So defense has been better, I think, than people have expected from the Chiefs. I've got them at number 4, and I'll skip ahead a little bit. I've got the Dolphins at number 3. How are you feeling about these power rankings so far?
Okay, I think there's a team I have at 5 that you're going to have a little bit higher than I do, considering the teams you're naming right now. But I'm all in the same ballpark. I think I had the Dolphins at 2, the Chiefs at 3. So we're kind of splitting hairs if I was going to disagree too much with you there.
By the way, before I reveal 2 and 1, when I'm doing like my full power rankings, like I get to like 9 and 10, and then like 11 through 20, I'm like, all these teams are the same. Like there's not much of a drop off. Like they all have question marks. I feel like there's less dominant teams in the league this year than I remember seeing in all my years watching football. It's really a wild phenomenon. But number 2, this is the one that I think you might cringe with a little bit. I'm way higher on the Lions than a lot of people. I'm an offensive line guy. I think offensive lines are so stinking important, and I love their line. I love their line depth, not just the starters. Jared Goff is putting up numbers. The offense is clicking. The defense is coming around. I got the Lions at number 2. How crazy am I?
So I knew you were going to give your top 5, so I sketched out what I thought my top 5 would be just so I had something to compare to you. I had the Lions at 5, and I thought that was like kind of a sneaky fun team to have at 5. So we're kind of on the same page, but I don't know what your process is. My first thing I go, obviously you look at the standings, you look at who they've played, and then I look at kind of net expected points added. That's my one like catch-all stat I like to look at, and the Lions come in at 5th in that. So it kind of validated my thought to have them 5th. Like you mentioned, they were a dominant offense last year, and then they added Jack Campbell, Brian Branch as rookies. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's been great for them. So they did what everyone wants to do. It's like you have a great offense, you have a mediocre defense, you address the defense in the offseason, the offense stays good, and you just become a great team. That's basically what the Lions did. I don't know if I want to say they're the second best team in the league like you, but I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, I suspected that I would be out on a limb with this one. I have a theory about why the Lions are, in my opinion, underrated right now. Because that week 1 game against the Chiefs, everybody saw it, right? And I do think that the Lions got lucky in that game. We saw so many drop passes from the Chiefs. I think it's sort of inserted this narrative into the average bettor's mind. Oh, the Lions are overrated. They're really not as good as the Chiefs, which may be true that they didn't deserve to win that game. But it can simultaneously also be true that they're really darn good, even though they got away with that week 1 game. So you got them at 5. I've got them at 2. But like you said, I think we're both way higher on the Lions than other power rankings that I'm seeing out there. And we'll see how it goes this week. They got a tough game against the Ravens. And I know one of us has that Lions-Ravens game in our picks that we've got coming up later in the show. So you guys can look forward to that. Niners, I've got it number 1. Not much to say there. They're just the most complete team. I'm not concerned about what happened last week because this is coming from a Niner fan, right? I know I'm going to sound bitter, but I think everybody agrees there was a couple very questionable calls in that game, and there were injuries as well. I'm not concerned about the 49ers losing that game on the road. I will say this, though. I am a little concerned about their rookie kicker. And so if he struggles and the 49ers don't replace him quickly, that could easily bump them down the power rankings for me. Little concern there, but they're still a top number 1 for me.
Yeah, they're my 1 too. I think it just comes down to talent. track record in coaching, and they have it all. They're like probably number one in all of those fields, and like you said, they played maybe their worst game of the season last week, and they still had a very good chance to win that game. They lost some of their best players. They still had a very good chance to win that game. So when you put yourself in positions to win, even when kind of everything's going against you, that's the sign of a great team.
Absolutely. Mitch, hit me with your bottom five. Who are the bottom feeders in the NFL?
I think this is almost more fun. Obviously, we had a lot in common on the top five there. I'm just going to rattle off my bottom five, or maybe I'll do the 29, 30, 31. We can discuss those. Then I'll give you my two worst teams, and we can break it down.
Perfect.
29, I got the New England Patriots. 30, I got the Bears. 31, I got the Broncos. Have any strong opinions on those being three of the five worst teams in the league?
Interesting that you got the Patriots in there, because I think they deserve to be there. They're playing poorly, but I don't think they're going to be there by the end of the year. I think either Mac Jones is going to get replaced or Bill Belichick's going to figure something out. So they deserve to be there. I got no beef with them being there, but I wouldn't expect them to be there 5-6 weeks from now. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, that's fair. I just kind of, you look at their scores, they're averaging like 12 or 13 points a game right now, and coming into the season, I was all over Christian Gonzalez, the defensive back, to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. Then he goes down for the season, and you lose, like, obviously, arguably your top corner. And so I think they've get nothing going on offense, a huge blow to the defense. That's kind of why that ship is sinking for me. Another kind of nugget on those bottom three, the Broncos are 1-4 right now, and they've only played two teams that I see as like above average in the power rankings. So they're not just losing to good teams, they're losing to the bad teams too. I think the Broncos are exceptionally bad. Not quite as bad as my two other worst teams in the league, though. I got the Carolina Panthers and the New York Giants.
All right, I think Giants in that order, right? Giants are last?
Yes, Giants are 32 for me.
Okay, I'm with you on the Giants for the opposite reason that I like the Lions so much. I said I like the Lions because of their offensive line. I don't know that I've ever seen an offensive line as messy as the Giants is right now. It was awful going into this week, and then they lost their guard, Lemieux, in practice this week when they were already banged up. So I have deep, deep concerns about the Giants moving forward. I like them last. Panthers, it's tough to argue with you about the Panthers being second to last, but I do want to throw this out there. Frank Reich's not going to be calling the plays for the Panthers anymore. Frank Reich was in charge of the worst DVOA offensive team last year when he was coaching the Colts. Now he's calling plays for the Panthers, and guess what? The Panthers have one of the worst offenses in the league. I think getting him out of there could be a spark for the Panthers. So while I'm okay with you putting them that low, I'm actually looking for spots moving forward to buy low on the Panthers, because not just because I'm fading the play calling of Frank Reich, but I think it can have a spark effect when you've got players that are maybe whispering to each other at the locker room, like, oh man, I don't know about this play calling that's happening. And then all of a sudden you get a young coach. Their offensive coordinator is a disciple of Sean McVay. So he seems to be a kind of a charismatic guy that the players can get around. I could see this sort. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the Panthers are going to go on like a 4 or 5 game win streak or anything like that. But can it be a situation like when we saw Steve Wilkes take over in Carolina, where that team starts to cover some more spreads and gain some confidence moving forward?
It's going to be a big 2 or 3 weeks for the Panthers, because like obviously you're not going to judge a rookie on his first 10 games, but if they change the play caller, Bryce Young still kind of looks like he's scrambling around. The NFL's moving a little too fast for him. That's going to be a problem, because you invested a top pick in the guy. I thought it was the right pick, but right now it looks like he could be the third best quarterback coming out of that draft class. Also on the Giants, I think we're both pretty consensus that they're the worst team in the league. I mentioned I go to expected points out, net expected points added as kind of my main stat. The difference between them and the second worst EPA team in the league is like the difference between 31 and like 20. They're just far and away the worst team in all the advanced metrics, the eye test too. Anything you look at to make your own NFL power rankings, you got to have the Giants at the bottom.
And how concerning is it that Tyrod Taylor, only one game, small sample size, he seems to be running that offense better than Daniel Jones was. And I'm interested to see if that continues moving forward. But, oh, my God, throwing all that money at Daniel Jones and your backup, a journeyman, Tyrod Taylor, is actually seemingly running this offense better than you. That is a bad look for the Giants. For their front office, that's a bad look for him. it's ugly. We'll see what they can do moving forward. They've got a game with the Jets coming up. That's going to be an interesting one. Probably winnable for both teams, but the Jets are starting to get hot, and I'm interested in keeping an eye on that team moving forward. If I had told you that they were going to be 3-3 with Aaron Rodgers at the beginning of the season, I think some people, based on how tough their schedule was, some people would have been like, that's a little ambitious, even with Aaron Rodgers. They've pulled it off without Aaron Rodgers, and now there's all these rumors that Aaron Rodgers might be getting healthier way sooner than anyone would have thought. Surprising doctors, maybe even back by the regular season. So keep an eye on the Jets. Last I saw, they were 90-1. I think that's worth a little sprinkle on Super Bowl odds for the Jets, just because Rodgers could be back. Am I crazy for that one?
Maybe a little crazy just because it is still the New York Jets. I could see like Rodgers coming back, everyone getting hyped, and then them just getting blown out in the first round of the playoffs. That seems like a classic Jets thing to do. I surround myself with too many Jets fans. Like half of my friends are Jets fans for some reason. And so I've heard all those talking points too. The, oh, Rodgers is coming back. Oh, we were only supposed to be 2-4 in these first 6 games anyways. I got to remind myself it's the Jets. I've seen those guys too sad too often to put any kind of money on the New York Jets.
All right, before we get into our picks for this week, let's do a quick little survivor pool talk. You and I are both alive in the survivor pools that we care most about. I've got one it's got a $9.2 million prize pool. There's about 1,800 people left. I've got 2 entries left. So I'm sweating this week. I think I gotta go with Seattle over Arizona, because Arizona, strangely enough, even though they've got 1 win, I think that they're a little overrated in the market. They haven't looked really good the last couple of weeks. Josh Dobbs is starting to look like Josh Dobbs. And I can't go with a team like the 49ers in this pool that I'm in, because I have to save them for holidays, things like Thanksgiving, etc. And so I got to go with Seattle this week. It concerns me because I think we could see upwards of 50 to 60% of people choosing Seattle in these survivor pools. And I like to zig when other people zag, right? That's my main survivor pool strategy. You don't want to be on that consensus team every week, but I feel like I'm being painted into a corner, and I kind of have to take Seattle this week.
Yeah, I thought for a moment I was going to pick the Browns. I talked myself out of that. Unfortunately for your zigzag theory, I'm also on the Seahawks this week. And I'm not in a $9.2 million pool, unfortunately. I would hope my prize pool would be that high. But I think it's just, I don't want to overthink this one, especially this far. My strategy this year has been, if there's an obvious pick, just take it. Survive as long as you can. Make it as deep as you can, because you know quarterbacks are going to get hurt. You know where the perception of a team in week 3 is going to be way different from that team in week 10. So maybe you can get a fade spot you didn't see coming down the road. So I think Seattle, albeit the obvious pick, is the obvious pick for a reason this week. You mentioned all the reasons to bet against the Cardinals. After that Cowboys loss, they've looked like what we thought the Arizona Cardinals were going to look like this year. So I'm taking the fade spot right now, and I'm hoping Seattle doesn't ruin my day and 60% of the other survivor pool participants.
It sounds like if you couldn't go with Seattle, Cleveland would be in consideration for you. I was considering the Raiders if Garoppolo had started. I can't trust them now, with a backup in there, but if I couldn't take Seattle, I probably would have to land on the Raiders, just because the Bears are so bad and it would be a fate of them. Moving on a little bit, I did want to talk about QB injuries. Speaking of Garoppolo being out, Justin Fields being out for the Bears, just wanted to give people kind of some tips of how I approach injuries throughout the week. I'm sure there's an easier way to find this page on NFL.com, but what I do every Sunday night is I Google notable NFL injuries week blank for the week that I'm on, and then NFL.com into Google. Notable NFL injuries, week 7, NFL.com. That's what I type into Google. It pulls up this cool page that NFL.com has where they tell you who got hurt that day. So you can see so-and-so left in the 3rd quarter, so-and-so left in the 4th quarter, didn't return, 2 offensive linemen left for the Dolphins, that sort of stuff. So when I'm putting my bets in Sunday night for the next week, I need to know who just got hurt in those games. And of course, I don't know exactly if these guys are going to be playing or not. Are they going to be practicing? But it's a starting point, and it's a foundation to let me know that there could be injury issues on the defensive line for the Eagles moving forward, etc. And then when the injury reports come out on Wednesday, I'm looking at, are they practicing or not? Obviously, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Inactives, of course, come out 90 minutes before the game. But I just wanted to throw that tip out there about the Sunday night getting a head start on some of these injuries. I also like to look at Pro Football Focus's player grades. And if a guy's hurt, is his backup experienced? Is he any good? How has he performed in the past compared to the guy that he's starting in front of? And then the last tip I've got for you is just always keep an eye on cluster injuries. We saw it last night. The Saints had 3 tackles were hurt in that game last night. That's a cluster injury. You know that's going to be a problem. I especially get concerned about cluster injuries on the offensive line and with defensive backs because those are situations that can be targeted. If you got cluster injuries at tight end, you can hide that and mask that as an offense. But when you got cluster injuries at tackle and at cornerback or safety, opposing coordinators can attack those weaknesses and make you look really bad. So that's just kind of some general strategy in terms of how I approach injuries with the NFL. Mitch, moving on, can you give me your first pick?
Yeah, I'm going to some college football action. I feel like the last couple of weeks, the college football slate's been like kind of lame, except for that USC Notre Dame game. There hasn't been any kind of marquee matchups. We got a bunch this weekend. And the one I'm most excited for is Penn State versus Ohio State, because I think this is the year that Penn State gets it done. I think they've won like one of the last 12 matchups. They're down bad. They've kind of been like the younger brother to Michigan and Ohio State for so long. But this year, they got everything they've usually had. The good run game, the solid defense, and now they have the quarterback. Drew Aller, 12 touchdowns, no interceptions. He looks legit. He's led the Penn State perfect against the spread so far this season. I think they're going to upset Ohio State.
Oh, on the money line.
I got them on the money line. I think the spread is sitting at 1.5 or 2.5, but I think they're going to get the win.
I like it, man. You're not the only one excited about that game this weekend. That's the marquee matchup. A lot of people looking forward to it. Got an NFL pick for you. I like the Commanders, -2.5 against the Giants. The reason that I mentioned earlier, the Giants' offensive line is bad. Strength versus weakness, Washington's front 7 is really good. I think Tyrod Taylor is going to have his hands full with that Washington defensive line. I think that could be a tough spot for them. Also, they're coming off of an emotional loss. Remember Brian Daboll? He used to play for the Bills. There's a couple guys on the Giants that were former Bills. And I think that game may have taken a lot out of them. To get that close and lose in that excruciating fashion, I'll be impressed if mentally they can bounce back in that game. And so, yeah, I'm going with Washington.
That's a good pick. I like that. I've kind of been on Washington for a while. I think they're kind of sneaky. And so I might ride that with you this week. I got an NFL pick as well this week. I'm going to go with the Lions against my Baltimore Ravens. I've watched enough. I've watched every single Ravens game this season. So I'm kind of plugged in. I think in my mind at least, I know what they are. I think they're pretty mediocre. I think we're like the 8th to 12th best team in the league, which seems like that's just kind of what we are every single year at this point. And like we said, we both really like the Lions. So the key here is they're underdogs in this one. I think it's +3. I'll take them on the spread because I could see like a sneaky Ravens 1 or 2 point win. But I like the Lions +3. I think they should be 2 or 3 point favorites in this one. The Ravens have gotten healthy in the last few weeks, but they still didn't look great. Like, they didn't look great in London last week. They had to travel back this week. So I think a lot of things are working for Detroit this weekend.
Yeah, good point on the travel spot for sure. Moving on, Steelers +3 versus the Rams. I think the Rams are overrated. They're really banged up. I just mentioned cluster injuries. They're really banged up at running back. That's not really one that you can hide. You got to run the ball. And so I could see the Rams getting a little one-dimensional in this game and throwing too much. And then you got Mike Tomlin, with extra rest. Mike Tomlin, genius coach, extra time to prepare for this tough Rams offense that I think, again, is going to be one-dimensional. So give me the Steelers with the 3 points. Wouldn't be surprised to see them upset the Rams whatsoever.
I would be surprised to see the Steelers upset the Rams. I think the Steelers stink. I'm going to fade them every single week this season. Obviously, it's because I'm a Ravens fan. But I do think – I feel like I say that every single year. This year, I actually believe it. Obviously, they beat the Ravens a couple weeks ago, but that was more because the Ravens drops than anything else. I think the Steelers are brutal. But we need to disagree on a couple picks, so I'm glad I got that one out of the way.
How many times in recent history, say the last 5 years, have you felt that way about the Steelers and then they've overperformed? Because that's Mike Tomlin's thing, right? He squeezes, kind of like Mike Vrabel, he squeezes the most out of his roster. You're like, I don't know who these skill position players are. I don't know who's on their offensive line, but he's still somehow winning. How many times in the past have you felt the same way and Mike Tomlin proven you wrong?
That's true. It is 100% true. Obviously, they've kind of owned the Ravens in the last couple of years, but I think it's because at one point they had either the elite running back or Big Ben at quarterback. Now they got neither of those. I think Najee Harris might be like a bottom 10 quarter or running back in the league. Kenny Pickett, bottom 10 quarterback. So I don't think they have a whole lot going on there on offense. And when you can't score, it's really hard to win games.
Good point. All right, well, we're against each other on that one. I'm excited to see how that one shakes out. You got one more pick for me?
Yeah, I'm going to go to the baseball side. And I could give a game pick. I thought about giving a game pick. But I like the Texas Rangers to win the ALCS. They went up 2-0 in that series. Everyone was all over them. Now they've dropped back those games to Houston. Everyone's swinging to the other side. Okay, the proven champs, the team that does it every single year, we'll go with Houston. But I just love the final 3 pitching matchups, or at least 2 of them for Texas. I trust Nathan Eovaldi and Jordan Montgomery so much right now. Both of those guys have allowed 4 and 5 earned runs respectively in their 3 playoff starts total. So those guys are giving you a quality start no matter what. If you give this Texas offense a quality start, they're going to win a lot of games. As I said earlier, I kind of trust the bullpen now with Leclerc and Chapman in the 8th and 9th. And Verlander and Valdez both kind of got rocked in their opening starts of this series. So I think a lot is working for Texas, except for the momentum in the series. If they can overcome that, win Game 5, I think they're going to run away with this one, probably in 6 games.
I love it. Mitch showing off his versatility with a baseball pick, a college football pick, and an NFL pick. My last pick for you is once again in the league. I got the Chargers plus 5.5 against the Chiefs. The Chiefs win a lot of games and then don't cover those games, and I can just see this being one of those 3-point games. Divisional matchup, a lot of familiarity between these two teams. I think a lot of people are expecting the Chiefs to run away with this one, but I think the Chargers are going to kind of have a bounce-back effort in this one. So that's our 6-pack of picks. We'll see how we do next week. Mitch, this has been a lot of fun talking with you today, man. So glad you were able to pinch hit today for Andrew. I know he appreciates it. I sure do as well. You guys can give Mitch a follow at Mitch Bannon on Twitter. Go ahead and follow Oddshark as well. At Oddshark on Twitter, at Oddshark Sports on Instagram. And, of course, our YouTube channel as well that we mentioned at the top of the show. Thank you guys so much for listening. Don't forget to check out some awesome articles over at oddshark.com. Mitch has got one up right now talking about some college football upsets that might be happening this weekend. We've also got a UFC 294 preview. That's a big one coming up tomorrow. Nick has a great article about Tyreek Hill potentially getting that receiving yard record. And so a lot of great content over at Oddshark. Make sure you check it out. Please like us, subscribe. Thank you all so much for listening. Any parting words before we take off, Mitch?
I got one more article coming next week. It's an early mock draft. I'm kind of excited about that one. I love the way the draft is shaping up this year with kind of potentially having the Bears at 1 and 2, maybe having to trade Justin Fields. So that one's going to come out mid to late next week. Keep an eye out on it. This has been very fun, Tony. Thanks for having me on. I'll pinch hit for you guys any day.
Awesome, Mitch. We'll have you on again soon. Thanks, brother.